Welcome back to The Move, where we are vibing with the book at least 10 minutes at a
The
time.
next 10 minutes, we're looking at Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32 to 39. Just to shout out to all the YouTube viewers, you'll notice that this episode only has one angle because
Yes.
we're redoing a
We're
reshoot.
reshoot.
So the last
Reshoot.
episode, it was my fault because I didn't hit record. Second time, this is your fault now.
My fault.
Because
Well,
'cause.
I got a little hyped, and I probably said some things I don't want on camera. And the spirit was like, yeah, man, go ahead, reshoot that.
hey, maybe no.
Yeah.
It's nice to know that there are moments like that because we talk about times where I think we were actually talking about this at dinner the other night, where it's like, man, there are certain things that you don't get the ability to take back.
Yeah.
I was sharing with you that time I was talking with one of my best friends, where it's like, he's like, I think I'm getting it. And I'm like, you're
like, no, you're not.
No, you're not, but you will.
Yeah.
And I meant to be hopeful. I meant to be like, you're getting there. But as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I'm like, oh no, that was not the way to say it. I positioned him as not getting it.
Yeah, that's something that I've been going in lately about not using any tactic of shame, whether explicitly or implicitly. And so the Spirit has been instructing me that positioning people in all places at all times in the Spirit, so that even when I know someone's an unbeliever, their unbelief is a deception that they don't need to live from, and truth overcomes lies. So I don't have to highlight the lie. I can just speak the truth.
Yeah.
And so highlighting the lie is like, oh, you don't get this, right? And in the sense that you're positioning them according to scarcity, as opposed to be like, hey man, this is the good thing. This is the good thing. This is the good thing. And if then they tell you, oh, I'm not getting it. Oh, I'm happy to instruct you.
Yeah.
Right. But it positions somebody like, oh man, you're just not getting it. Right. Or like, when you get this, it's going to be real good.
I think the skeptical version of me prior would be like, but that's just not true. They don't get it. So it's important for you to point the fact out that they don't get it. And like, okay, let's just look at the words of Paul, where Paul's like, we don't view anyone according to the flesh. Does this mean that in fact no one's in the flesh? Like, well, obviously not. But the way that we position people, the way that we treat people, how we steward this good news that we've been given is by treating all men as if they're no longer in the flesh. We treat them through the Spirit.
Yeah. So to recognize that somebody might not have an understanding, but for me to make the choice that I don't position them and speak to them from their lack of understanding, I position and speak to them from the fullness of who I know who they are as son and a daughter. So if your former self would say, but it's not true, they don't get it. I was like, yeah, but still son, still daughter.
100%.
So I speak to them in agreement with son and daughterhood. I speak to them in agreement with how much the Spirit wants to reveal. So if there is a you don't get it sort of moment, that you don't get it sort of moment has to be framed within that context, right? And that might look different through different interactions. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to lead with the scarcity. I don't want to lead positioning with somebody with an othering. And in the last episode, there was some of that language, and the Spirit was like, no.
So this is actually very meta in the sense of what we're talking about in these passages. It's kind of ironic that you had that moment when we're talking about this text, because the text actually talks about how, you used to be, or you recall the former days when you were in line, you endured a struggle, yada, yada, yada. But I really like verse 39, but we are not those who shrink back and are destroyed. Paul or the author of Hebrews is positioning the listeners as the kinds of people who will remain faithful to the end. Is there a guarantee that this is in fact going to happen? Like, who knows? He doesn't know all things in the sense that God knows. But what he is doing is he's positioning people according to the abundance and viewing the best in them.
Absolutely. And that's earlier on when he talks about land that has drunk the rain and yields a good crop versus land that drinks the rain and does not yield a good crop, and that it's better to be burned. He concludes by saying, we believe better things about you, right? So he using this metaphor about land to typify the reception of the good news of Jesus. He's saying, we don't believe that you're the sort of land that drinks the rain and doesn't yield a good crop.
That's right.
We believe that you are that sort of land. So to always posture ourselves in that way, and to actually do that, interestingly, is what ends up causing some of the problems, right?
Yeah.
So you have struggles, you have sufferings, and sometimes you're publicly exposed and there's reproach. And that reproach is by way of actually not coming down at times in a way that the world would want you to come down on certain folks. You can think about Jesus, right? In John chapter 8, is it?
Which story?
Is it the woman that's caught in adultery, right? He doesn't position her. Is it 8 or John 10?
I was going to guess 6, but that's also just a throwing of a dart into the dark. Let's find out.
No, I believe it's John chapter 8. Yeah, at the beginning of John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. He doesn't position her the way that
Everyone else does.
everybody else does.
Everyone's like, let's stone her. And he's like, I mean, maybe if you have no sin, then throw the first stone.
Right? He doesn't. You think about in Mark chapter 3, the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. He doesn't position him the way everybody else does. On that
outcasts and, no good and sinners and
not being healed on the Sabbath, right? And he's like, yeah, no, right? He heals. He doesn't position. It's interesting because I think, what is it? It's in Mark 6 or 7 maybe, where the Syrophoenician woman comes up to him and is like, Master, my daughter. And he's like, I can't give the food away.
Right.
To
dogs.
To dogs. So right there, you're like, oh, he positioned her. But if you actually read the context of Mark, it's an invitation for her to believe, like for her to pursue. Like, do you really see me for who I am? And she's like, yeah, but even the little dogs pick up the morsels. Like, just say the word. He's like, woman, your faith is great.
Yeah.
Because up to that point, nobody's quite sure who this Jesus is. He's casting out unclean spirits and demons. He's healing people. The disciples at least see him have mastery over the wind. And everybody's like, man, who is this man? What is he? And it isn't until Mark chapter 8 that Peter's like, you're the Son of God, and things shift. But before that, everybody's kind of like, what's going on? And this woman sees him correctly. And in seeing him correctly, she sees that he's really positioning her in favor. She's like, come on, Master. It's like, yeah, right? So this idea of constantly positioning people in favor does end up costing you.
So just to tie all those together, you're saying that positioning people according to the truth as opposed to what society has conditioned us to do so, positioning them as wounded, as fill in the blank, as whatever, this kind of sympathy-driven response, which seems to be kind of the zeitgeist of the moment, that when we choose not to do this, but to position people according to truth, there are people who receive it, but there's also a whole host of people that are like, no, you didn't do what I was expecting you to do, and as a result, like, I'm coming for you.
Yeah, even in religious context, right? In the religious context, there's often a requirement to position somebody as something less than in order for them to get to. So this is the example of my friend Eddie Cornejo, who just has a crazy story and was accused of some crazy things.
The episode just dropped. I think if this episode's going tomorrow, it just dropped yesterday. Because this episode drops tomorrow.
Yeah, well, Thursday.
Their episode.
Yeah, so if you're listening Thursday, it dropped Wednesday.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's live now is what I mean to say.
Go check
watch
it
the
out.
episode.
Yeah, this is the 3rd episode in this series. So you have Eddie's story, then Jayla's, then Eddie and Jayla's. That's on Death to Life podcast. So
for those who have never heard the story, here's a synopsis of it.
Eddie's a former pastor who cheated on his wife. Through the miracle of the Holy Spirit, they reconciled, but then Eddie was accused of sexual assault and ended up going to court. The case ended up being, I think it was dismissed, right? It was not adjudicated. Maybe that's not the wrong term. I don't know, but it was dismissed. But Eddie ends up having, questions over his head. Like, it was a he said, she said, right? She said, he says, and people want to offer evidence that they think is conclusive on one side or the other. And we're just not making that determination for us. We're saying that if Eddie's actually guilty, then he should be in jail, but presently he's not. And if somebody wants to, cast aspersions on him actually being a part of what we're doing, well, I don't really know what to do with that, because for the past 5 years, he's demonstrated fruit of the Spirit in his life. I can attest to that. I know you can attest to that.
He also hasn't been on stage for 5 years. I think that's in context that's important.
Yeah, he hasn't been on stage in the teaching capacity. He sure has been on stage leading worship with us.
In like the last year or two.
Yeah, early on, he did share his testimony, right? And folks were up in arms about that. So the ministry that we steward, Love Reality, has been placed in a negative light in some corners of the world because of our association with Eddie. And so this is what I'm saying.
It ties in here.
It ties in right here, so that verse 33, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those such treated. Right? That deeply resonates with me, because you end up not positioning people the way the flesh would want to position people, and you see them through gospel lens, and in seeing them through gospel lens, the sort of the guard against one of the maybe mature expressions that can lead to doubt. It's a mature expression, like, oh well, let's take a wait and see approach. Let's at least be mindful that that's very important. Like, let's be mindful. But in doing that, we still position people in spirit while journeying with them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that we journeyed with them, positioning them in spirit, seeing them in favor, and still this happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, it makes sense in this context. Like, very likely what the author is doing is referring to himself. Like, if this is Paul, he's the dude who murdered dozens of people, like tons of people, like this is the reputation. And all of a sudden you start to hear reports of like, what do you mean that he's preaching at your synagogue? What do you mean that he's ministering to Gentiles? Like, he's doing all these like really wild things. There's a whole background in history and story. It makes sense that you're a little skeptical. Like, I don't know if I want to invite this guy to the table because he just murdered a bunch of people all the way over there.
Now, if I could interrupt for the sake of accuracy.
Okay.
We don't know if he murdered a bunch of people.
Okay.
What we do know is that he took part in...
Doesn't he talk about how he persecuted... I guess maybe persecuted is the word, not murdered. I just corrected myself. There's the reading of the text.
And he was there at the stoning of Stephen.
He co-signed murder.
Co-signed murder.
Okay, so either way, that's still a bad thing.
Absolutely. No. It does not redeem him in any way, shape, or form, for the sake of accuracy.
So the point being is that he is one of these people that has a questionable history, not even questionable, like a legitimately bad history.
Absolutely.
And yet, in order to continue to position him as an outsider is to call the Holy Spirit a liar.
Yeah. And then, the beautiful thing about Barnabas, the son of encouragement, who actually brings him in. And so, you see in this passage that there's this place where it's going to happen.
Well, yeah, of course. But what's cool is that the record stands that Barnabas is a man of encouragement.
Yeah.
Like, the people that choose to be willing to go into that mess and to journey faithfully over a period of time to do the accountability, do all those things, like, when the record stands is that, like, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and this is meandering on today's topic, but I'd like to challenge the notion of accountability.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to follow Barnabas's trend, and that is he was a son of encouragement.
Interesting.
So that the way we keep somebody quote unquote accountable is to encourage them according to the truth of what they have. I'm nobody's judge. I can't do the accounting for them. I can't.
Right.
Oh, how you doing?
Yeah.
You right?
Yeah.
Because the accounting term is to bring something to account. Like, that's something the judge does.
Yeah.
Right. The accounting term is to measure the beans on one side or the other.
Sure.
I'm not counting like that, right?
And even if you could, you lack the faculties to be able to make an accurate assessment. I mean that to say, because I was talking to Joel, who's launched a men's study group, Love Killed Lust, right? This idea of the gospel as it pertains to those who are entangled to their lust.
Yeah.
And one of the observations that he was making in Bible study the other day is like, dude, like, accountability partners ain't it. Like, you could just lie to your accountability 100%. Partner. Like, what are they going to do about it?
Oh, I did for years. I lied to my accountability partner.
Did you have the covenant eyes on your computer?
Bro. And did I get a VPN and navigate it? Come on, man. Everybody, the thing is, these are the pegs of doubt on which to hang unbelief.
The apocryphal story about the covenant eyes guy is that because the dude invented the software, it was a personal problem. Like, he had himself, but because he invented the software, he knew the workaround. I looked for that attestment. I remember hearing that one place somewhere one time. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, the person who's going to invent this thing very likely knew the workaround, and very likely, if they were still a slave to this thing, used the workaround.
And when you position somebody in spirits, but somebody externally still has doubts, they're going to use things like, oh, well, has he had accountability? And that's just the peg of doubt on which to hang your unbelief, because then you become the judge as to whether or not that accountability suffices for you to be okay to actually believe this story.
See, that's what's interesting, because in interacting with people who are skeptical about the story, when they ask the question, is there accountability, there's a general like hesitation to even enter into that conversation, because then you're legitimizing the question. Because the actual answer to that question is, yes, there has been accountability, quite a bit of it. There's been counseling, professional counseling. There have been people who have journeyed with this individual for years on years and years and years. And even though the answer could just be yes and we could be done with it, it's like, why is that the question?
Yeah, I get why the question is there, but even the answer, man, like, oh, there was professional counseling. Do you know how their professional counseling went? They checked in with their counselor for like 6 months, right? And the counselor would just hear how they were doing, what the Spirit was doing in their lives, and listen. And after 6 months was like, yeah, you guys are good. You guys don't need to come back here. Check in every once in a while. Jay would be like, I sent him a Christmas card. That's my check-in. Right? So the actual story is not that there was some counselor who was like, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. No, there was some counselor who actually sat and listened, which so often is what counseling entails so often, right?
Great. Listen to people.
Listen,
not a bad.
And he
I run a show called I'm Listening.
Right? He listened to what the Spirit was doing.
Yeah.
And then listening to what the Spirit was doing, it was just like, yeah, you guys have transformation, right? So that, again, just connecting these things together, my buddy Eddie, absolute transformation. And what's interesting, he wasn't my buddy prior to this.
Yeah,
me and Eddie were not actually cool prior to him doing what he did. We became cool in the Spirit. Yeah. It's a whole nother story. But prior to that, we were not cool. He becomes cool in the Spirit. He goes through this thing.
He becomes cool in the Spirit.
Not me.
You're
I did
already
too.
cool.
Yeah. We come together, and from coming together, there's persecution, there's questioning, there is co-suffering with him, and we're being taught that even in the co-suffering, what comes out of y'all is to position people in spirit, even if it shows up on a podcast where you want to say something about somebody. And even though you don't say the person's name, you have them in your mind.
It's not cool.
And the Spirit's like, nah. Suffer well, because you're not the ones who are going to shrink back. Like, suffer well. You suffer persecution. It is what it is. The Spirit's moving. Like, you're not the ones who are going to be destroyed.
It's interesting here that the context in verse 35, you have need of endurance. When I would think about, like, here's the patience of the saints. Like, the idea of endurance as a believer was that I'm going to get persecuted because of my righteous stance on Saturday versus Sunday, or whatever it was, right? But not even the whatever it was. That was the thing that was in my mind. It's like, I'm going to have to endure these things. There's going to be persecution. The endurance of faith is holding fast to the confession.
Hold fast,
Yeah. This would be what it looks like, is to hold fast that God has done a thing, not only in your own life, but you see it in the life of a transformed individual.
And we hold fast to that confession, and we want to test all spirits. Constantly 100%. Seeing if we're still in the faith, right? We walk and live with integrity. So we want to encourage one another in the faith. We want to admonish and rebuke one another in the faith. We want to hold accountable to the faith, maybe, right? But we want to walk in the Spirit. But I'm just recognizing more and more and more that the more and more you walk in the Spirit, and the more and more you walk this thing out and you follow the way of Jesus, stuff's going to come. There is going to be opportunities to participate in persecution, and you yourself might be exposed to reproach and affliction. It is what it is, and this isn't a woe is me thing.
No,
this is not woe is me. Look, this is my house. I live in Hawaii. I'm chilling. We're chilling. Like, it's not a woe is me as much as it is a renewal of mind according to the instruction of the Spirit. And this is what the author of Hebrews is trying to teach. Listen, because of Jesus, have a renewal of mind, instruction in the Spirit. You are going to endure these things. It is what it is. Stay on the track of faith. Jesus is better. Jesus is greater. Love people well because you've been loved well. Receive the Father instructions because he'll discipline you, and just have a clear eye. Don't be sidetracked by the circumstances that happen, and then don't speak out of turn in a podcast because of the circumstances that happen.
Definitely don't do that.
Keep living well because Jesus has done a great thing, and we don't shrink back.
Yeah.